In the silence of her modest home in the Balkans, a woman who lost her physical sight gained the vision of eternity. The universe speaks through the most unexpected vessels, and Vanga became one such vessel, a human radio, receiving frequencies from beyond our limited dimension. What did she perceive when her consciousness turned toward the great metropolis of New York? Not merely buildings of concrete and steel, but a spiritual anatomy, a city with its own karmic pattern, its own destiny written in the invisible ledger of cosmic balance. The towering skyline of Manhattan represents humanity's greatest achievement and its deepest spiritual blindness simultaneously. These monuments to human ingenuity reach toward heaven not in worship, but in challenge. Structures built not to honor the divine, but to replace it. In the spiritual teachings of the East, such imbalance cannot sustain itself eternally. The universe seeks equilibrium in all things. The prophetic visions concerning New York speak not of random destruction but of spiritual recalibration. What appears as catastrophe to the material eye is transformation to the spiritual one. The earth itself has consciousness, not as we understand it, but as a living, responding organism that feels the weight of humanity's collective vibration. When a city becomes a temple to materialism, when its streets echo with the footsteps of souls who have forgotten their divine origin, when wealth accumulates while wisdom diminishes, the very ground beneath responds, not with anger, but with the inevitable response of natural law, action and reaction, cause and effect, the universal principles that govern all existence. The seers and mystics throughout time have understood this language of balance. They did not predict disasters. They read the spiritual imbalances that must eventually find correction. The prophets of old were not fortune tellers, but spiritual physicians, diagnosing the ailments of consciousness before they manifested as physical reality. New York stands as a symbol of humanity's collective choice, to build upward without building inward, to conquer nature without honoring it, to accumulate wealth without accumulating wisdom. Such choices create vibrational patterns that ripple through the fabric of reality itself. In the higher octaves of consciousness, where Vanga's perception reached during her moments of prophecy, time is not linear, but simultaneous. The future exists not as a fixed destination, but as a probability wave formed by the collective consciousness of humanity. When she spoke of New York's destiny, she was reading the energetic trajectory already set in motion by millions of choices, millions of thoughts, millions of actions taken without spiritual awareness. The spiritual teaching here is profound. Cities do not fall because they are punished. They fall because they have built themselves on foundations that cannot sustain the weight of their own imbalance. The towers of Babylon fall not because God strikes them down, but because their very structure defies the natural laws of spiritual harmony. What appears to be punishment is actually correction. What seems like destruction is actually transformation. The elements themselves, earth, water, air, and fire, are teachers, not tormentors. They respond to the vibration of human consciousness, amplifying what is present, reflecting back to us our own creations. When the seer spoke of New York's tribulations, she was not condemning the city or its people, but illuminating the path of awakening that awaits all civilizations that lose their spiritual center. The greatest cities of past ages, Rome, Athens, Tenochtitlan, Babylon, all followed this pattern of rise and recalibration. It is not the end, but a turning point in the spiral of evolution. The message from beyond time is not that New York is doomed, but that New York, like all human creations, exists within a larger context of spiritual law. No empire lasts forever. No city escapes the cycle of renewal. What humanity builds without divine alignment will eventually be realigned by forces beyond human control. This is not to inspire fear, but awakening, not to predict doom, but to illuminate choice. Every moment, the probability wave of the future shifts according to the consciousness behind our actions. If New York's destiny appears challenging in prophetic vision, it is not fixed, but fluid, changeable through a collective return to spiritual awareness. The true teaching of the prophecy is this: when humanity builds monuments to its own glory while forgetting its divine source, Nature itself becomes the teacher that reminds us of our place in the cosmic order. The earth trembles not to destroy, but to awaken. Waters rise not to punish, but to cleanse. Darkness falls not to frighten, but to remind us of our inner light. In the vision of New York's future challenges lies a doorway to its transformation. Perhaps this is the deeper meaning behind the seer's words, not a pronouncement of inevitable doom, but a spiritual invitation to change course while time remains. What would it mean for New York to become a city aligned with divine principles? What transformation awaits if its inhabitants remember their spiritual nature before external forces compel that remembering? These are the questions that the prophecy truly asks of us. The ancient wisdom traditions have always understood that our planet is not merely an inanimate rock floating in space, but a living, breathing consciousness, a divine organism with its own intelligence, purpose, and response mechanisms. What modern science now begins to recognize through concepts like the Gaia hypothesis, spiritual teachers have known for millennia. Earth feels, Earth responds, Earth communicates. When the mystic eyes of Vanga perceived the relationship between New York and the Earth beneath it, she witnessed not random geological events, but a profound conversation between human consciousness and planetary awareness. The skyscrapers of Manhattan rest not merely on bedrock, but on a living entity that senses the spiritual vibration of every footstep, every thought, every intention manifested in concrete and steel. What we call natural disasters are, in the higher octaves of understanding, natural responses. The Earth's immune system activating to restore balance where imbalance has become too pronounced. Just as the human body produces fever to burn away infection, the Earth produces earthquakes, floods, and storms to recalibrate areas where the harmonic frequency of life has been disrupted beyond sustainable limits. New York represents humanity's greatest material achievement and, simultaneously, its most profound spiritual challenge. A city built on the worship of material acquisition, where the temples are not places of prayer, but trading floors, where value is measured not in spiritual growth, but in financial portfolios. This spiritual emptiness creates a vibrational void that the earth eventually must address. The prophecies speak of ground that trembles beneath the city not as punishment, but as communication. The earth's attempt to shake humanity awake from its materialistic slumber. When concrete cracks and towers sway, it is not destruction for destruction's sake, but the planetary equivalent of a parent shaking a child who has wandered too close to danger. Consider how the indigenous peoples understood this relationship with Earth. Before building, they would ask permission of the land. Before taking resources, they would offer gratitude and respect. This wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated spiritual ecology, an understanding that we exist in conscious partnership with the planet that sustains us. New York, like many modern cities, was built without asking, taking without gratitude, expanding without reverence. In spiritual terms, the corruption that Vanga foresaw triggering Earth's response is not merely political or financial misconduct, though these are symptoms of the deeper ailment. The true corruption is the corruption of purpose, the forgetting that human existence is meant for spiritual evolution, not material accumulation. When a civilization uses its creative power primarily to serve the lower chakras of survival, pleasure, and power, rather than the higher centers of compassion, truth, and divine connection, it creates a vibrational imbalance that cannot be sustained indefinitely. The Earth itself, being a conscious entity, feels this imbalance as physical pain. The concrete that seals its surface prevents its natural energy exchange. The extraction of its resources without reciprocity depletes its vital force. The vibration of millions of humans focused primarily on material gain creates a dissonant frequency that disturbs the planet's natural harmony. And yet, in this understanding lies not despair, but hope. If Earth responds to human consciousness, then a shift in that consciousness can alter the projected outcomes. This is the deeper teaching hidden within prophecy. Not that disaster is inevitable, but that our collective spiritual awakening can change the conversation between humanity and planet. What would happen if New York, symbol of material achievement, became also a beacon of spiritual awakening? What if its financial districts became known not only for wealth creation, but for wealth circulation aimed at planetary healing? What if its towering buildings were matched by towering achievements in compassion, sustainability, and conscious evolution? The spiritual physics is clear. As above, so below. As within, so without. The outer world manifests what the inner world cultivates. The earth responds not to what we say we value, but to what we actually vibrate in alignment with. When a critical mass of New York's inhabitants, and by extension, humanity itself, begins to vibrate with gratitude, reverence, compassion, and spiritual purpose, the conversation with Earth shifts from confrontation to collaboration. This is not naive spirituality, but energetic reality. The same quantum principles that reveal how observer affects observation apply on the planetary scale. Our collective consciousness creates our collective reality. The prophecies of disaster are probability waves, not fixed destinies. Waves that can be altered through intentional shifts in the field of human awareness. The trembling earth beneath New York that Vanga foresaw is not the end of a story, but the beginning of a choice. Will humanity continue building towers that reach for the sky while forgetting the ground that supports them? Or will we remember our place in the sacred order, not as Earth's conquerors, but as its consciousness in human form, its children and caretakers simultaneously? The voice of the Earth speaks not in English or any human tongue, but in the language of consequence. Floods, tremors, storms. These are not punishments but feedback, not retribution but rebalancing. When we learn to listen to this voice, not with fear, but with understanding, we begin the process of healing our relationship with the living planet that sustains us. New York stands at this crossroads of consciousness. As the financial heart of the global system, its vibrational signature affects the entire planet. The choices made within its boardrooms and living rooms, its government offices and street corners, ripple outward to touch all of humanity. This is why its destiny features so prominently in prophetic vision, not because it is condemned, but because it is consequential. The spiritual invitation extended to New York, and to all who participate in the systems it symbolizes, is not to abandon material achievement, but to infuse it with spiritual purpose. Not to retreat from human creativity, but to align that creativity with planetary well-being. Not to fear the Earth's response, but to change the questions we are asking of it. For in the end, the Earth does not wish to reclaim its cities through destruction. It wishes to transform them through awakening. The planetary consciousness that we are part of seeks not our downfall, but our elevation, our remembering that we are not separate from nature, but nature itself in human form, with the divine responsibility that such awareness brings. Throughout human history, light has served as the ultimate metaphor for truth, awareness, and divine presence. From the creation stories, where divine utterance first separates light from darkness, to the Enlightenment traditions, where inner illumination represents the highest achievement of consciousness, light has always symbolized the authentic, the real, the true nature of existence. But in our modern world, we have created an artificial light, both literal and metaphorical, that does not illuminate but rather obscures the greater light of truth. The dazzling skyline of New York, with its perpetual glow that drowns out the stars, perfectly embodies this paradox. A light so bright it creates a deeper darkness, a radiance so constant it blinds us to the greater luminescence of the cosmos. Vanga, in her moments of transcendent vision, perceived a time when this artificial light would fail, not merely as an electrical blackout, though that may be its physical manifestation, but as a profound collapse of humanity's misplaced faith in its own creations. The prophecy of darkness descending upon the city of lights speaks to a fundamental spiritual principle. That which is sustained through illusion must eventually yield to that which is real. The artificial light of our modern civilization is powered not just by electricity, but by a collection of unsustainable illusions. The illusion that material acquisition leads to fulfillment. The illusion that technological advancement equals evolutionary progress. The illusion that economic growth can continue infinitely on a finite planet. The illusion that we are separate from nature rather than expressions of it. The illusion that comfort and convenience are adequate substitutes for meaning and purpose. These illusions form the operating system of modern consciousness, particularly within great urban centers like New York. They are the unquestioned assumptions that drive individual lives and collective systems alike. But like all illusions, they cannot withstand the pressure of reality indefinitely. Eventually, the greater truth asserts itself, not out of vengeance, but simply because what is real will always outlast what is false. The prophesied darkness that comes to New York represents this inevitable confrontation between illusion and truth. When the power fails, when the systems falter, when the artificial light can no longer be maintained, this is not punishment, but revelation. Not an ending, but an unveiling. In darkness, the stars become visible again. In silence, the inner voice can finally be heard. Consider how dependent modern urban life has become on these layers of artificial light. Not just the physical electricity that powers our homes and devices, but the conceptual frameworks that tell us who we are, what we should value, how we should live. What happens when these frameworks are revealed as insufficient? What occurs in human consciousness when the stories we have told ourselves about reality no longer match the reality we are experiencing? This is the deeper meaning of the Great Darkness that Vanga foresaw, a time of profound disorientation when the narratives that have guided human civilization reveal their limitations. The financial systems that promise security through accumulation, the technological solutions that promise to solve problems created by previous technologies, the social structures that promised fulfillment through status and achievement. All these artificial lights flicker and dim when confronted with the greater power of natural law. Yet within this prophecy of darkness lies a seed of tremendous hope. For it is only when artificial light fails that we remember to look up at the stars. It is only in darkness that our eyes adjust to perceive more subtle illumination. It is only when our manufactured certainties falter that we become open to greater truth. The spiritual teaching encoded in this vision is not that humanity will be punished for its arrogance, but that humanity will be liberated from its illusions. The darkness comes not to condemn, but to reveal, not to end human achievement, but to transform human understanding of what achievement truly means. When the towers of banking and commerce that define the New York skyline can no longer sustain their operations, when the electronic systems that mediate modern existence can no longer function, when the artificial light that has drowned out both stars and inner knowing flickers into darkness, this represents not the end of human civilization, but the beginning of its maturation. For too long, we have defined progress as moving away from nature rather than moving into deeper harmony with it. We have measured success by how effectively we can insulate ourselves from natural systems rather than how beautifully we can integrate with them. We have sought to conquer rather than commune, to extract rather than exchange, to elevate ourselves above the natural world rather than recognize ourselves as conscious expressions of it. The darkness that comes to New York in prophetic vision represents the necessary correction to this fundamental misalignment. It is the loving response of a universe that seeks harmony, not the vengeful punishment of a deity who demands submission. It is physics, not fury, consequence, not condemnation. And what awaits on the other side of this great unveiling? What emerges when artificial light can no longer maintain the illusions it was designed to protect? Nothing less than the possibility of a new human civilization, one built not on conquest, but on communion, not on extraction, but on exchange, not on artificial separation, but on authentic connection. Imagine New York transformed not by destruction, but by revelation. Imagine its towering achievements of human creativity and collaboration infused with a new understanding of humanity's place within the greater systems of life. Imagine its brilliant innovations directed not primarily toward profit and convenience, but toward harmony and flourishing for all living beings. This is the true promise hidden within the prophecy, not that New York will end, but that New York will transform. Not that human achievement will be erased, but that human achievement will be redefined. Not that darkness will conquer light, but that artificial light will yield to authentic illumination. The spiritual invitation extended through prophetic vision is never merely to witness what might happen, but to participate in what could happen instead. Prophecy, at its highest function, serves not to frighten, but to awaken, not to limit possibility, but to expand it through conscious choice. What if the residents of New York, and by extension, participants in the global systems it represents, were to voluntarily dim the artificial lights that have obscured greater truth? What if, rather than waiting for systems to collapse under their own unsustainability, humanity chose to transform those systems through expanded awareness? What if the great transition from illusion to truth were navigated not through crisis, but through wisdom? This is the choice that sits at the heart of all. Authentic spiritual teaching. Will we awaken through insight or through impact? Will we change direction because we see clearly, or because we have exhausted all other options? Will we humble ourselves voluntarily before the greater laws of existence? Or will those laws assert themselves through circumstances we can no longer ignore? New York stands as both warning and possibility, a symbol of humanity's greatest achievements and its most perilous illusions. The prophecy of darkness descending upon this city of light is not its final chapter, but its most important crossroads. For when artificial light can no longer sustain itself, true illumination has its greatest opportunity to dawn. The collapse of artificial light is not the end of seeing, but the beginning of vision. If these revelations about Vanga's prophecies concerning New York resonated with your soul, don't let this be the end of your spiritual journey. Subscribe now to continue receiving these profound insights that mainstream sources won't share. The time for spiritual awakening is upon us. Will you be prepared? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and join our growing community of truth seekers. Remember, awareness is the first step to transformation. Subscribe, share, and let your voice be heard. Retry.